Hi guys, I'm Bonnie from bonnieandblack.com, and today I have a sewing tutorial for you to make a super cute little sweater for your little girl. This is what it looks like. I found a couple of darling strappy sundresses at Old Navy for my girls this season, and I knew they'd be perfect for the 4th of July, but I wanted a little something to cover their shoulders. So I found a sweatshirt in this navy and red stripe in the women's section, bought it in extra large, and made 3 adorable little sweater bolero jacket thingies for my girls. And I'm going to show you how to do the same thing. Let's get started. The first thing we need is a pair of scissors, fabric, or a sweatshirt to refashion, and some sort of shirt or jacket pattern. I used my Infinite A-line dress pattern bodice, I linked to it in the description of this video, and just sized up for this little shrug. As you can see, I already cut out a couple of little shrugs out of this sweatshirt, which is why I'm just dealing with some scraps and had to get a little creative to cut it all out. We're going to cut a front bodice piece, a back bodice, as well as 2 short sleeves. Be sure to save any scraps to use for a neck facing later on. Just a side note, we will be cutting the front bodice down the center later on, so instead of cutting it on the fold here, like I did, you can just cut 2 halves instead. When we're ready to start sewing, we'll match up the back bodice to the front bodice, right sides together, and sew across shoulder seams and side seams. I used a serger throughout this project, but any sort of stretch stitch will work just fine. Be sure to press well after sewing. You'll notice that my front bodice still has a little triangle of stretch fabric from the sweatshirt's neckline. We'll end up cutting that out in just a minute. If you did cut your front bodice piece on the fold like I did, this is where we'll cut it in half. Be sure to match up your shoulder seams and side seams so that you're cutting directly down the center of the piece. At this point, we're ready to start sewing our sleeves. Fold each sleeve in half lengthwise, right sides together, and sew along the straight edge. Then turn it right side out and press this seam flat. To attach the sleeves to the bodice, we need to turn the bodice inside out and then slip the sleeve into the armhole so that right sides are touching. Line up the side seam of the bodice to the underarm seam of the sleeve that we just sewed and pin together. Then line up the shoulder seam of the bodice to the top of the sleeve and pin as well. Continue pinning all the way around the sleeve and then stitch together. Also, be sure to press this seam well. And then repeat with the other sleeve. Now we need to curve the front bodice pieces. I used one of the shrugs I'd previously made to trace this one and make sure they all matched up, but it's up to you how much of a curve you want here. Just trim off a bit of the bottom and top corners of one side of the bodice until you like the look, and then use that side as a template to cut the other side. In order to make a neck facing, we first need to measure all the way around the front opening of the shrug, from the bottom hem on one side of the front bodice, up and around the neck, and back down to the bottom on the other side of the bodice. Next, we need to cut a strip of fabric that measures the same measurement as the front opening. You can see that I didn't have enough fabric to make one continuous piece here, so I actually cut out several strips from my scraps and then sewed them together until it was long enough. We'll attach the facing to the shrug by pinning the facing to the raw edge of the bodice front opening, right sides together. Pin all the way around the opening, and then stitch the facing and the bodice together using a small seam allowance. I used 3/8 inch. Once the seam is sewn, we'll need to fold the facing around the bodice edge until it's no longer visible from the front and press it down well. Then we'll top stitch the facing to the bodice by sewing close to the raw edge of the facing. This helps the facing to lie nice and flat and look really pretty from the outside. Our last step is to hem the sleeves and bottom of the bodice. I decided to finish the raw edge of my shrug by first serging these edges, but you can do this using a zigzag stitch or not at all if your fabric doesn't fray. You can see how nice it looks inside with a finished raw edge, but of course this step is totally optional. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to refashion a big sweatshirt into a couple of cute little sweaters for your daughters. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like more refashions like this or what other kind of tutorial I can make for you next. Also be sure to like this video, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel so I can keep making awesome content for you guys. We'll see you later. Bye.